Right now, we've some sad news to share with you. Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest-serving monarch, has indeed died at age 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, is now the King of the United Kingdom and its Commonwealth realms. Let's go to Ashley Webster for the latest. Ashley.
Yes, a statement from the royal family. This is the statement that people were certainly fearing. The royal family saying, quote, "The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort," that would be Camilla, "will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow." That means that Charles, of course, immediately becomes king on the Queen's death. The question also is, what name will he pick? He could be Charles III. He could pick one of his Christian names. He's got Charles, Philip, Arthur among the choices. So those are the things that will have to be decided later on. But now it's the remembrance of Queen Elizabeth II dying at the age of 96. She was the eldest or the oldest and the longest reigning monarch, 70 years on the throne. When her father, George VI, died in 1952, she became queen. She was officially coronated the following year in 1953 and has ruled ever since. And, you know, I was just looking at some of the comments about the Queen. She loved her father, George VI. And like her father, she always was very understated. She knew that the role of Queen was to be uncontroversial, provide quiet stability. And I think she operated under a couple of mantras. One was just set an example, and number two, do your duty. And she lived by those mantras, and for 70 years, she certainly lived up to those things that she felt were very important as a monarch. So it is the end of an era. She's overseen 15 prime ministers. She's met 13 of the last 14 U.S. presidents, I believe. Lyndon B. Johnson was the only U.S. president that she never actually met in person. But I just think back to the war. She was a mechanic, believe it or not, in early 1945. Of course, the World War II came to an end in September of 1945, but she led by example even then. But it is the end of an era. And there's going to be a lot of heartfelt outpouring, I am sure of that, as we take pictures there of Buckingham Palace outside. Small crowd gathering. I would suspect that more will follow, Neil. But this was the news that we dreaded. She has been in failing health for the last several months. And now this very sad news that she was surrounded by her children were all there. I understand that Harry was on his way. I'm not sure whether he made it there in time, but all of that, I'm sure, will be revealed. Neil.
I'm very glad, to your point, that she had that moment to celebrate her 70th Jubilee, and even this week,
yes,
a couple of days ago, to say goodbye to the outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson and welcome Liz Truss, the 14th and 15th Prime Ministers with whom she has dealt, and officially
yes,
let them form their cabinet, as well as say goodbye. There is a procedure, though, here, Ashley, if you can maybe bring me up to date on it. There's now officially a 10-day period of mourning, and then, of course,
yes,
Charles taking over as King of England. I don't want to put you on the spot. Can you illuminate what that process is going to be like?
Well, there will be an investiture ceremony for that. As you say, 10 days of mourning. There'll be I'm sure there'll be a state funeral. There'll be heads of state from all around the world will come and pay their respects. And then following that, yes, Prince Charles, who has been the heir apparent for so long, he's 76 years old, will now officially take the throne. His wife, Camilla, will be the Queen Consort. There were questions as to what title she had, but the Queen, back in her Platinum Jubilee speech earlier this year, indeed said that Camilla would be the Queen Consort. Basically, as her husband is the reigning king, she would be known as the Queen Consort. And then after that, there will be a ceremony which will make Charles officially the king. And then, of course, those questions I mentioned earlier, Neil, I wonder what name he's going to pick. It could be Charles III, it could be Philip, it could be King Arthur, to be honest with you, which would be very interesting indeed. I'm sure he's had a long time to think about it. We know that. So I'm sure all of this will be revealed in due course. But for the next 10 days, all the accolades will be coming in for Elizabeth II.
You know, actually, I'm gaining an appreciation for what you grew up in and how these things are meticulously planned. in the tragic
Yes.
passing of a royal figure. They have been waiting for this sad occasion and the planning that comes for it and after it. It's been codenamed London Bridge by Buckingham Palace, apparently, as well as the government and law enforcement. The events then dominate all radio, television broadcasts for the next 10 days. Now, we do know as well that large crowds are expected to pay their respects, and global leaders, the likes of which attending her funeral will rival that after the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. So it's that period of world leaders coming to the United Kingdom, and then she will be buried in Windsor Castle, we're told.
Yes.
This is the home of Britain's kings and queens, I guess, for more than 1,000 years. I always forget the depth and the history of Great Britain and the fact
Yes.
that we measure things in a couple of centuries. They go back, well over 1,000 years, don't they?
They certainly do. And of course, let's not forget her husband of more than 73 years, the Duke of Edinburgh, is at Windsor Castle. He died 18 months ago now. I think it's 18 months tomorrow. So she will be with her a husband of so many years at Windsor Castle. Just looking at this video from the Jubilee, the Platinum Jubilee, just look at the outpouring there.
Right.
And she did make a couple of balcony appearances, and there were questions about her health back then. She did have to cancel, I think, one or maybe two events, but overall, I thought she did terrifically. And look how great she looks there in her green outfit with all of those crowds celebrating her 70 years plus on the throne. And I would not be surprised to see a similar outpouring of love for the Queen.
No, you're quite right, my friend. You know, actually, it's remarkable, too, because we're both old enough to remember when her popularity was teetering after the death of Princess Diana, that she seemed morally detached. She didn't
Yes.
appreciate the magnitude of that event. But she righted the ship and got through that. We've seen divorces and breakups within the royal family. At the time, between Charles and Diana, that was a huge deal. But now, sadly, like in our times today, more common. But she got through that, and now the focus is on Charles. Could he do the same thing?
Well, I would hope so. You know, certainly the family problems were front and center and made a lot of money for the tabloids, that's for sure. And yes, she went through a lot of tough periods there. But, you know, when you look at the polls, I think 62% of Brits, the last one I saw, support the monarchy. That is down from 67% in June of 2020. But a 77% approval rate among those 65 or older. So certainly the older citizens of the United Kingdom are very much in favor of the Queen. And I think overall, her respect, no matter what age you are, people do respect the job she's done, the sense of duty. And yes, she did manage to ride out, let's face it, some very difficult times that were played out so publicly in front of everyone. It must have been absolutely mortifying for her at the time, but she got through it.
You know, I'm wondering, too, and here I'll defer to you as I think you have a fake British accent, but it works for me every time. But kidding aside, we're told that Charles is a very different type of a family member. Obviously, doesn't have the heft and the gravitas that his mother has, and she's had 70 years to build that. He's less popular than his mother, though. He oftentimes has bristling relationship with the press and goes on with a public persona that seems very cold and icy to some. So there is, I'm sure, a period of rally around the castle and you know, royalty here. But he might have a tougher go of it. What do you think?
I think so. He's very austere, for sure. He has an incredibly dry wit, which the Brits are famous for, and I love the dry wit, but he'll say something that, if you think about it, is actually quite funny, but people just don't seem to get it. He's a lot more political, and that would be interesting to see what he does as king. He's very much about the green agenda. He's very much about the architecture of London and calls some of the new buildings an abomination. He's been quite liberal with his opinions, which as king he probably should not be, and it'd be interesting to see how much of that he kind of holds back. He certainly had a long time to learn from his mother. But you are right, he does come across as a bit of a cold fish. He looks a little awkward sometimes, but I've actually seen him give speeches very clever. I don't know whether he wrote them, but they're very clever and very well delivered and absolutely hysterical. So I'm hoping some of that personality will be able to come through, because I think he has it in him, but I think the perception of him is perhaps not as great as it is for his mother.
I'm just wondering as well, you talked about the popularity of the whole royalty, and that it was hit a low point right after Diana's death. It's since gotten higher. I was fascinated. You said that for older Brits, there's no question that they need the monarchy. It serves a useful purpose. It's something that gives them a foundation. It unites both parties. But I'm wondering, in this environment, with all the scandals and everything else and the controversies and the family squabbles, everyone, you know, if you had a dime for every time they said, this is it for the royals, of course, the royals survived.
Yeah.
What does your gut tell you now?
I think they will. It's been a question that's been, as you pointed out, bandied about a lot. There is a Republican, a Republican government movement, if you like, that's die-hard. They usually get about 20% of the vote. Often the younger people who say, why are we paying taxes to maintain these giant castles and the roof repairs and all of those things? And there are still going to be those. But I think overall, the general consensus in the UK is one that they're very proud of their royal family. They love what it stands for. It brings in a ton of people for tourism, and people are fascinated by it. There are those that say, does it really belong in today's society? Well, more than half in England believe they do, that they represent something that's been stable and a part of the culture, if you like, for centuries and centuries, and they would hate to see it go.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say that. Thank you, Ashley, for your expertise here.